After the deadly coordinated detonation of thousands of Hezbollah pagers in Lebanon, which killed 12, including 2 young children, and injured nearly 3,000 yesterday, this afternoon there are reports of more explosions in southern Lebanon. The AFP news agency saying the explosions have been caused by walkie-talkies spontaneously blowing up. Lebanese state officials report 9 people have so far been killed this afternoon. The assault on Hezbollah, therefore, it seems, isn't over. In the last few hours, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed some frustration at the attack and the potential escalation that could occur.
Broadly speaking, we've been very clear, and we remain very clear, about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza, to see it spread to other fronts. It's clearly not in the interest of anyone involved to see that happen.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. In the last half hour, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned there could be more violence in Lebanon to come.
The logic of making all these devices explode is to do it as a preemptive strike before a major military operation. So, as important as the event in itself is the indication that this event confirms that there is a serious risk of a dramatic escalation in Lebanon, and everything must be done to avoid that escalation.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Reuters reports this afternoon that Hezbollah say it has attacked Israeli artillery positions with rockets in what would be the first cross-border attack since those pagers exploded yesterday. Israel has so far stayed silent, but in all likelihood it seems it must have been done at their behest. Alistair Bunkle is Sky News Middle East correspondent joining us live. Thanks for coming on, Alistair. What more do we know about the walkie-talkies, the handheld radios that have exploded this afternoon?
Hi, Tom. This seems to be a second wave of attacks, smaller in scale than what happened yesterday, both, I think, in terms of the numbers of devices that have exploded, but also the number injured and the number killed. But as I say, a second wave of attacks, and probably targeting, the reason they would have targeted walkie-talkies is because Hezbollah would have had walkie-talkies as a backup method of communication in the event of war. And it's pretty likely they would have turned to walkie-talkies because of what happened yesterday. And this, assuming it is Israel behind it, is reinforcing the idea that Israel has extensive reach into Hezbollah, its security apparatus, and its ability to severely disrupt Hezbollah's ways of communicating safely.
We're seeing reports, Alistair, this afternoon, just in the last 15 minutes, actually, that solar energy systems have begun to explode in Beirut. What more do we know about that?
I've also seen reports that biometric devices have been exploding as well. So, possibly things that might require fingerprint or face recognition technology. Now, all of these reports, I should say, are yet to be substantiated. Mm-hmm. And there is an awful lot of speculation about how this is happening, precisely who's behind it, how they got explosive material, if it is explosive material, into these devices, how it's detonated remotely, and what might come next. But as I say, we can safely assume that Israel is behind this. Israel very rarely actually claims responsibility publicly for assassinations of key figures, but in a way, it's their silence that leads us to conclude that it is Israel. And you can also ask the question: if not Israel, then who? This was so chaos amongst Hezbollah last night. From people I was speaking to in Lebanon, there was a real sort of sense of panic. They had these paging devices, which most of us binned 20-odd years ago, because Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, probably quite rightly thought that mobile phones were compromised. And so they switched to paging devices, a far more basic way of communicating. It doesn't transmit, so you can't track them easily. And yet suddenly they found themselves blowing up in their pockets and in their bags, in their hundreds. And now they've switched to a backup system, again, a pretty simplistic system, walkie-talkies, and they are now blowing up as well. And so not only, practically, as I said, does it prevent Hezbollah from communicating and strategizing and coordinating effectively. But also, it will just, and particularly if things like solar panels and biometric devices are also being targeted, it will make them, where can they turn? What can they do that is safe?
Alistair, really grateful to have you on the programme this afternoon. Thank you for your time. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News Middle East correspondent. 5:09. Let's turn to Sir Mark Grant, former UK ambassador to the UN and former national security advisor. Thanks for coming on, Sir Mark. Alistair mentioned it there, but what do you think all of this might herald?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. I think there's two things to say. I mean, one is that in an intelligence military sense, it's a fairly brilliant operation by Mossad, assuming that they were responsible. But in military terms, normally you would say these are shaping operations in preparation for a bigger campaign, kinetic campaign, maybe an invasion of southern Lebanon to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. Now, all the evidence is that there isn't such an operation planned in the immediate future. So there may be some truth in the suggestions that Israel detonated these devices yesterday and today slightly earlier than they had planned because Hezbollah had got suspicious that something might have been tampered with. So in a sense, it's not now being seen as a shaping operation to disrupt communications of the enemy before you attack them. Maybe it's seen now, in retrospect, more as a deterrent to try and prevent Hezbollah from launching further attacks. But I must say, if that is the purpose, the second one, deterrent, I think it's very unlikely to be successful.
Because Hezbollah are already talking about revenge coming.
I think it's going to be very difficult for them not to respond to this. We've already seen some rocket attacks just in the last 12 hours. So I don't think they will sit quiet. But they are severely disrupted if they can't communicate very easily by the sort of devices that have exploded. They'll be very nervous even of mobile phones now because of the risk of them being intercepted and tampered with. So I think it'll be difficult for Hezbollah to launch a sort of major attack on Israel in the near future. But equally, it's quite clear that Israel is now determined to drive Hezbollah back away from the border north of the Litani River by whatever means is necessary. It's very significant that the cabinet has now adopted a new war aim, for the first time in the last 12 months, of allowing the residents of the north, the 60,000 Israelis who live near the Lebanese border, to return to their homes. And for them to do that safely, it's pretty much essential for Israel to drive Hezbollah fighters away from that border.
So is this a continuation, do you think, of Israel's fight with Hezbollah, which has been going on for, well, a very, very long time, but recently flared up over the last year or so? Is this a continuation of that, or is this something new and something bigger?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, it is a continuation, but it is potentially a trigger for the wider regional conflict that many commentators had expected, but in fact hasn't happened over the last 12 months. I think the Americans deserve a lot of credit for the deterrence work that they have done and trying to prevent this Hamas-Israel conflict into widening beyond what has happened so far with the exchanges on the Lebanese border, some attacks from Iran, but relatively limited, some attacks by Houthis, but again, relatively limited. It hasn't exploded into a regional war. But I think, Tom, we're now facing a moment where that risk of escalation is right back center stage, and what happens over the next few days will determine whether this is just another spike or the start of something much more significant.
The suggestion we're hearing right now, I think from the BBC, is that the UN Security Council is going to meet before the end of the week to discuss the explosions of walkie-talkies and pagers that have happened in Lebanon, the Council's president making the announcement in a brief statement. So we'll see what the UN does or what it says when it convenes shortly. How could this have happened, Mark? How could it be that walkie-talkies, pagers, solar equipment in people's homes starts to explode?
Well, we don't have all the details yet, Tom, on that, so I wouldn't want to speculate too definitively, as it were. But the suggestion is, and to me the most credible likelihood, is that Israel intercepted the supply of this equipment to Hezbollah. If you recall, at the beginning of this year, Hezbollah decided that they weren't going to use mobile phones because they were worried about those phones being intercepted and therefore the communications being intercepted by Israeli intelligence. So they ordered a new set of walkie-talkies and pagers, and were planning to use that as their major primary communications network. Now, it does appear perhaps that Israeli intelligence was able to intercept that supply, put explosives into those devices to be detonated at a time of their choosing. That, to me, seems to be the most likely origin of these explosions, although, as I say, we don't know the full facts yet.